all this mean? And so, John, in the light of the major conflict in Israel currently, we need to discuss how the Bible has already told us the outcome of this conflict. Can we summarize what the conflict is all about and what has fueled it?
Yeah, well, that's where we want to start, really. And the question is, how far back do you want to go? You can go back as far as Cain and Abel, when sin entered the world, and Cain slew his brother because he was jealous of him. So essentially, this whole thing, it's about jealousy. The Palestinians want the land of Israel. They think it's theirs. Luke mentioned Ishmael and Isaac. It certainly goes back at least that far because they were both sons of Abraham. But basically that's what's fueling this historical hatred and jealousy. And those are all attributes of the flesh, of the human nature. They're not spiritual attributes. And basically, within one day of a 50-year period from 1973, we call it the Yom Kippur War. It stands for the Day of Atonement, which you read about in the Old Testament. Back in 1973, the Jews were attacked by the Arabs on that day. And basically, within one day, that was on the 6th of October 1973, it was on the 7th of October 2023, just a short time ago, that this invasion took place, this massacre took place on the southern border there of Israel. Now, I appreciate Yom Kippur because the Jewish year is based a little bit differently than just a solar year. Yom Kippur this year was actually in September, but basically within a day, 50 solar years brought about this massacre. So I'm sure there's no coincidence in that. I'm sure the Palestinians had that in mind. But also, and you hear a lot of Christian commentary about the current conflict and about Israel in general, but no one seems to mention the clear significance that this happened pretty much on a 50-year, which is the Jubilee period that the Bible talks about. In Jewish law, 50 years, every 50 years, it was regarded as a jubilee, a time of setting free. So basically, 50 years, God has allowed this to happen to the Jews. And it's on the day, basically within a day, of the Jewish Day of Atonement that God gave the Jews. What was important about that Day of Atonement was that it was designed for Israel to humble themselves before their God and realize their need for God's atonement. And here's God allowing this invasion twice in 50 years, pretty much right on this Day of Atonement. Israel should be listening to that. Now, thinking about it from the Arab perspective, the Muslim tradition says that Muhammad, their prophet, traveled to Jerusalem to the mosque on his famous night journey, but there's no record that Muhammad ever did this. He may have dreamed it, but he never actually went there. And there's certainly no reference to it in the Quran. That's the holy book of Islam. And there's not one single reference to Jerusalem in the Quran. And that's interesting because if it's such a holy place and, the Arabs should have it, why isn't it talked about in their own holy book? Whereas there's over 600 references to Jerusalem in the Hebrew scriptures. The other thing I just want to say, from those who might be listening who are atheist, and I used to be one of those, an evolution atheist who just believes we all just evolve, that there's no God at play in this whole situation. It's just a bunch of morons, fighting over land. Well, you shouldn't be too worried because the premise behind evolution, and I'll quote to you the title of Charles Darwin's book, who originally taught everyone about this. Everyone's heard of the origin of species, right? But how many of you know that this that I'm about to read to you is the complete title? On the origin of species by means of natural selection or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. Wow. That's amazing. What Darwin is saying is that if you're the strongest and you survive, then you allow for the favored race to continue. So, in other words, if the Jews are stronger and they take out a whole lot of Palestinians, listen, that's just evolution. If the Palestinians win and Jews get slaughtered, that's just evolution, because this is the struggle for life to determine who's the favored race. And so, I'm speaking to those who might be listening who are evolutionists. You need to think about where that theory has taken and will take you in your worldview. Because if that's your worldview, we are nothing better than animals fighting for survival. Okay, that's just a thought in passing. Now, you can look at the news. I have to say, on the mainline news in New Zealand, there's very little talked about Israel. It doesn't really make the news. If you look at some of the other TV stations like Al Jazeera, obviously they're very Arab orientated. I saw an interview of a Palestinian justifying civilian deaths in Israel because Israel, in their mind, are occupiers of the land that is there. So because they're occupiers, if we massacre civilians, well, that's because they're occupiers. They shouldn't be there. Yeah, and so the justification goes on. From the Palestinian point of view, and this is their own manifesto, they say, we will not recognize Israel as a Jewish state. We welcome every drop of blood spilled in Jerusalem. This is pure blood, clean blood, blood on its way to Allah. We must return to the option of one Palestine from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. We will never recognize Israel. We do not accept a Jewish state. We will never accept a Jewish state. So that's the manifesto of the Palestinians. They think it's their land, and they're very open about that. The interesting thing to point out here is that there's well more than 100,000 Palestinians who, prior to this conflict, actually had work permits, working quite happily in Israel, legally contributing to the Jewish economy, to the Palestinian economy. In fact, there's a lot of Palestinians who are happy just to be part of Israel and to work there, and to just get on with their lives. So why do we have this split? Why do we have this little, strip of land we call the Gaza Strip, where the Palestinians are, and we have Israel, which the Palestinians basically want? Well, like I say, that the hatred goes back a long way, but you've got to remember Israel was in that land thousands of years ago, and we'll talk about the archaeological evidence for that shortly. But they were in the land. They got ousted by the Romans in AD 70 and scattered throughout the world. During that 2,000-year period, basically Israel was inhabited by a variety of different people, essentially left just to become swampland and desert. And when you come to the 20th century, the Turks had control over it. World War One saw Britain conquer the Turks and take control of that land. And in 1917, the British declared what is called the Balfour Declaration, in which they acknowledged that they were in favour of the establishment of a Jewish state in what had become known as Palestine. So Britain ousts the Turks. They are in favour of the Jews inhabiting their homeland. Now, what you've got to realise is that as you see this Balfour Declaration play out, there was a lot of speaking with forked tongue going on from Britain, because they were also promising the Arabs. And it was very political, because they wanted the support of the Jews for World War One, but they also wanted to keep on side with the Arabs, who had, guess what? The oil. And even in 1917, oil was fundamental to the machinery going on. So once World War One finishes, Britain starts partitioning the land. And they gave the Jews a certain amount, and they gave the Arabs the West Bank and that Gaza Strip. So what we see today with the Gaza Strip, with Israel, now it's changed since then, and we'll talk about that shortly, because there's been a number of wars which has slightly changed it. But the reason the Palestinians are in the Gaza Strip and the Jews are in their land basically is because Britain, who had conquered the land, partitioned it that way. It was a recipe for disaster. Everyone knew about the Arab attitude to the Jews, and to really think you could partition this fought over land like that and expect everyone to get along, recipe for disaster. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment.
So, John, does either party actually have the rights to the land of Israel?
Yeah, it's a good question. Luke mentioned Genesis earlier, where God says to Abraham, in relation to Isaac, the promised seed he was going to have, he says, in Isaac, speaking to Abraham, your seed shall be blessed. So, in other words, the promise is given to Abraham that he would inherit this land. It was called Canaan in those days. What we know as Israel today was promised to Abraham and his seed, Isaac, as an everlasting possession. Now, that's a promise of God to Abraham, that he would, as an everlasting possession, be given the land. Again, the Arabs, Islam, the Quran can't, can't make this claim to a promise like that. And interestingly, from an Islam perspective, whose holy book is the Quran, I don't know how many of you realize this, but the Quran actually accepts the Torah. The Torah is what's known as the first 5 books of what we call our Old Testament: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. That's where God gave Israel the law. Now, the Quran, Islam, accept the Torah. So if we quote from Genesis, if we quote from the Torah, Islam, the Quran, has to accept that. And that's actually from book 5, called the Table, chapter 65, if anyone wants to get a Quran and check that out. And I want to stress this promise given by God through Abraham that Islam accepts as their father, Quran accepts the Torah, was given through Isaac, not Ishmael. So, in other words, really, Islam is forced to acknowledge that the Jews, through Isaac, were promised the land by God. Genesis 17, verse 8 says, I will give to you and to your seed the land where you are a stranger, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. So this is a claim to the land that the Jews have.
Thank you for that, John. Some have disputed Israel's past occupation and say Israel is an occupation of a land that is not theirs historically. Is there any evidence to prove Israel's claim to the land?
Yeah, this is honestly a claim that comes out of either gross ignorance or gross prejudice, because just to try and keep this a bit shorter, I'm going to rattle these off, but there are dozens of things that prove Israel has been in the land for centuries, if not millennia. Number one, there's something called the victory stele of Pharaoh Meneptah, who was a king of Egypt, known as a pharaoh, discovered in 1896, and it reads like this: Israel is devastated. Now, that's proof positive that Israel was living in Canaan by at least the 13th century BC. That's how long ago this was. Number two, 1994, a stone slab was found on a mound in Israel known as Tel Dan. Tel just means a mound. And an inscription was found on the stone which read like this: the house of David and the king of Israel. It was dated to the 9th century BC. Okay, it confirmed that Israel was in the land and that David was a king there. Number three, Pharaoh Shishak, another Egyptian pharaoh. Pharaoh Shishak's victory relief on a temple wall at Thebes in Egypt confirms Israel's occupation of Canaan. Shishak reigned from about 940 to 915 BC, and his relief records how he invaded Israel, plundered treasures from the temple built by Solomon, took captives, etc., etc., confirming Israel's occupation of the land. Number four, the Moabite stone, discovered in 1868 in Jordan and now in the Louvre Museum in Paris. is inscribed with a record of the rebellion of Mesha, the king of Moab, against the king of Israel. This was about 850 BC. Number 5, the black obelisk, commissioned by the ancient Assyrian king Shalmaneser, was discovered in Nimrud in Iraq, called Iraq today, in 1846. It's inscribed with many scenes and inscriptions commemorating the victory deeds of the king who reigned about 850 BC. One of the scenes on the obelisk refers to Israel in her land, which he invades, and refers to the king of Israel, Jehu, which again we read about in the Old Testament. Number 6, Sennacherib's prism, as it is called. The six-sided hexagonal prism, unearthed in 1830, and it records the triumphs of the Assyrian king Sennacherib, who reigned about 700 BC. And on the prism, it refers to the Jews in the land of Canaan and mentions their king Hezekiah by name. Number 7, references made in the Bible to King Hezekiah, as I mentioned, who in the 8th century, due to the threat of Assyrian invasion and siege by Sennacherib, commissioned the digging of a tunnel to divert water from a lower pool outside the city. If anyone's been to Israel, you may have walked through that tunnel. Now, towards the end of the tunnel, there's an inscription which was found on the wall in 1880 describing the carving of the tunnel. And this also confirmed another part of Bible history concerning Israel during her occupation of the land. Number 8, added to all this evidence, numerous tablets, coins, seals bearing the names of Jewish kings who reigned at Jerusalem, along with other Israelites who lived in the land, all referred to in the Bible. Not to mention Dead Sea Scrolls discovered in 1947 in Qumran, which authenticate Jewish scriptures. Okay, so there is heaps of evidence, lots of archaeological evidence that shows Israel was in the land around 1500 BC when Moses brought Israel, Joshua brought Israel into the land. Now, the other thing which just clinches this whole thing is that Israel, during their history, have had 3 temples on Jerusalem, on the mount there, currently occupied by an Arab mosque. They've had 3 temples. All right, Solomon's temple, and then there was a temple they rebuilt when they came back out of Babylon, and there was Herod's temple built around the time of Christ. Now, guess what? Archaeology has proved that Solomon's temple was there. You can see the stones. Herod's temple, there's still the Wailing Wall there. You can see that. So again, the stones are crying out, saying, "Listen, the Jews have been there for thousands of years." So this is proof positive that the Jews were there. It was their land. It was only because of the Romans driving them out in AD 70 that they lost access to their land there.
Thanks for that, John. So this question's probably another one of those questions that maybe an atheist or an evolutionist or perhaps even someone from like a different religion would ask. You've been quoting the Bible to support Israel's claim to the land. But what if the Bible is just an invader's contrived record and not, in fact, from a supernatural God?
Yep. And I get that, because it's all very well to quote the Bible and say, well, the Bible promised the land to Israel, but what if they just made it up as they went along? But this is the amazing thing about the Bible. In Isaiah 43, verse 10, this is written about 700 BC. God says through his prophet Isaiah, "Israel, you shall be my witnesses that I am God." Now, if you go to a court case, there'll be witnesses brought forth by the prosecution, by the defense, prove their case. And hear what God is saying, because bear in mind, the nations that surrounded Israel all had their own gods, all claiming to be God. Today, it's a little bit like that. We have the gods of materialism. We have the God of atheism. It's all a worldview. It's all a belief structure, all saying, this is the way to go. This is the way to believe. So God says, listen, I'm going to prove to you once and for all, I am the true God. So he chooses Israel as his witness, as prime witness. And he says, listen, I'm going to predict your future. All right. And if anyone else can do the same, then we'll acknowledge your God and I'll rest my case. But if not, hear what I have to say and say it is the truth. And you are the only God. So God said to Israel during Moses' time, if you obey me, I'll bless you. You'll be blessed in your land, you'll prosper, all your crops will prosper, you'll be the main key nation in the world, everyone will come to you, etc., etc. But if you disobey me, I will curse you. And one of those curses was that I will scatter you throughout all the nations of the world. Your name will become a byword, meaning, a derogatory term.
Yeah.
Interesting that, isn't it? Ever heard the phrase, oh, you're a Jew? It's a derogatory term. And guess what happened in AD 70 because of Israel's sin? They got scattered, just as God had said. But the amazing thing about it is that, and again, this isn't because of the righteousness of the Jews, but this is because God is proving a point. He says, right, you're going to be scattered, but he said, I am with you, for though I make a full end of all nations where I scatter you, I will never make a full end of you. Wow. Who today can say I'm a Babylonian? Who can say I'm a Hittite? Who can say I'm a Moabite? I'm a Jebusite. I'm a Girgashite. These are all nations more powerful than Israel. They are gone today. And that's in Jeremiah 46, verse 28, by the way. Jeremiah 31, verse 35 says, thus saith the Lord, I give the sun for a light by day and the moon as a light by night. And I divide the sea. The Lord of hosts is his name. If those ordinances depart from before me, says the Lord, in other words, if the sun stops shining and the moon stops shining, Israel shall cease from being a nation before me. If you can measure the heaven above, now bear in mind, in Jeremiah's day, they counted the stars as a couple of thousand and they thought that was the limit. Now we've gone out into space and we just keep going and going and going. We can't even get close to measuring space. It says, if you can measure heaven above, and if you can go to the foundation of the earth, then I'll cast off my nation Israel. See, this is a claim by God to prove that he is the only true God, and it's Israel. Now, at this point, I want to make it very clear, we are in no way condoning war in any shape or form. We're not saying Israel is righteous and everything they've done is righteous. Not at all. And I'll make the point shortly that actually, the very fact that they've had a massacre in their country, it's a sign that they need to get back to their God. But for God's sake and for his name's sake, prove to the world he is God. He has chosen this nation and he will fulfill his promises. They will survive, come what may. So if you're looking for a reason to believe, Israel, Israel is the answer. In Ezekiel 37, there's another prophecy given by Ezekiel around 600 BC, and he saw a valley of dry bones. God said to him, what is this valley? He says, well, I don't know. And God explained, this valley of dry bones, it's Israel. They are dead. At that point, they'd be taken into captivity by Babylon. It was very much mirrored by what Nazi Germany did to the Jews as well. And you've all seen the photos of the bodies, the corpses, the bones, of the Jews. They were dead as a nation. But guess what? Israel is back on the map again because God said, I will never make a full end of you. So it's not just the made up stories of an invader, of an occupying force trying to support somehow they own the land. This is a promise of God declared to eternity that Israel will never cease from being a nation. Now, it doesn't mean they're not going to have hard times ahead because of their sin. I'm going to talk about that in a moment.
Thanks, John. So, what has led to Israel being a nation today?
Well, as we mentioned, there are those prophecies by God indicating she would never fail. She would always remain a nation. But bear in mind, as I said, in AD 70, the Romans came in and invaded Israel. They scattered Israel throughout the world, and for almost 2,000
Mm.
years, the Jews never had a homeland. Now, we have sympathy for both sides. There are atrocities, there are deaths, there is pain on both sides. It's a horrible situation.
Mm.
But if you're tempted to just feel that, oh, Israel shouldn't be bombarding Palestine and it's all their fault, bear in mind what the Romans did to the Jews.
Mm.
They massacred them and drove them out of their homeland in AD 70. It is said that actually there were not enough trees left to cut down to make crosses for the amount of crucifixions the Romans performed on the Jews. Severe atrocities. So you've got to have your sympathies both ways, surely. You can't just be totally biased. Now, as I mentioned, in 1917, this Balfour Declaration, presented by the British government, declared that the Jews would be supported in a homeland. But like I say, they sort of hedged their bets, Britain here, because they still wanted to promise the Arabs the land as well. And this is proved by the fact that after the Second World War, when Nazi Germany had exterminated something like 6 million Jews in the death camps, the Jews now had nowhere to go. There was still a lot of anti Semitism in Europe. And there was very much now, because they'd nowhere else to go, they'd suffered terribly under Hitler. So they decided, a lot of them, let's go back to our homeland. Let's go back. And
Mm.
remember, the Balfour Declaration sort of laid a foundation so that Britain, who had control of the land, could allow this. But Britain would turn back large loads of refugees trying to get into the promised land because they limited how many Jews they wanted to come to support the Arab cause. Now, this caused a great conflict among Jews who were trying to resettle the land. There were like commando groups called the Haganah and the Irgun who would attack British forces in support of their claim to the land. And believe it or not, in 1947, you know what Britain did? They said, you know what? We're leaving. We're tired of all this conflict and losing people. We're leaving. They may not have said so in so many words, but this was the effect of it. They left, leaving the Arabs and the Jews just to fight it out. 1947. 1948, Israel becomes a nation. May
Mm.
1948. When they declared themselves as a nation, they were attacked by other Arab nations. They survived, and so it went on. Now, interestingly, the British Empire, which is what it was the empire of the world, and they won the Second World War. So quite powerful as an empire. Their nations, their colonies spread into Africa, to India, down into little old Australia and New Zealand. And look what happened after this 1948 period, when they essentially didn't care about what happened to the Jews. Very quickly the British Empire declined. And I believe personally that is intrinsically linked to their attitude to the Jews. By the time you get into the 1960s, most of these colonies have either fought or claimed or just been given independence. And you look at that British Empire now, they're not an empire at all. Um, Almost becoming a third-rate nation due to their immigration issues, their economic issues. So I'm not anti-Britain. My mother's English, so I'm sort of half English. But these are the facts of history. Britain left the Jews to it, and the Bible clearly says, those who bless you, Israel, will be blessed, and those who curse you will be cursed. So that basically is how Israel have come back into their land, very much prompted by their harsh treatment under Hitler, prompted as well by the Balfour Declaration, which, although a little bit two-faced, actually did give them opportunity. The fact that Britain took control of the land, wasn't controlled by the Arabs, again gave the Jews a leg up. So that's a quick bit of the history there for you.
So, John, you've been sharing the history of Israel, but what is the history of the Palestinians who claim rights to the land as their homeland.
Mm. So the word Palestine, that comes from the word Philistine. You read about Philistines in the Bible, and if you go back to Genesis 10, it talks about the sons of Ham, who was one of the sons of Noah, of course, Cush and Mizraim, and then in verse 14, it was through him that came Pathrusim, Casluhim, out of whom came Philistin. So basically, the Philistines were descendants of Ham, one of the sons of Noah. I'll point out, not the son of Shem. Okay, so that line from Abraham follows down to Noah. Shem was then the promised seed, and it goes on through there. So again, the Arabs have no link to that promised seed, especially the Philistines or the Palestinians. Now, the Philistines vanished as a nation. No one today can actually say, I'm a Philistine, just as I mentioned with the Babylonians, the Hittites, etc. They've all vanished. Whereas the Jews have kept their national identity. So there's a big difference there. Now, the interesting thing about this title, Palestinian, the area called Palestine used to include the territories of the present day Israel and Jordan. So, in other words, what's called Israel today, Jordan today, Gaza Strip, was all known as Palestine. And this name was actually given to it by the Emperor Hadrian about 134 AD. He was the Roman emperor. He was the one, at least partly responsible for driving the Jews out of their land, very anti-Semitic, wanted to get away from this term Israel. So he called it Palestine, right? So he calls Canaan, became Israel. He calls it Palestine. So that's where we get this name. Now, from 1517 to 1917, most of this area remained under the Ottoman Empire, the Turkish Empire. When Britain took control of it in 1917, she ended up in 1922 allocating nearly 80% of Palestine to Transjordan, including the West Bank, and Jordan also included the majority of the Arabs who lived there. And since the Jews and the Arabs all lived in this land designated Palestine, they were all called Palestinians. Just want to stress that. When this partition takes place by Britain, Jew, Arab, and the land that's become known as Palestine, they are all called Palestinians. The fact is, what are called Palestinians today who occupy that Gaza Strip or live in the Gaza Strip, they're known as Palestinians, but there's no historical, even now, Palestinian language. There's no Palestinian culture distinct from other Arabs in the area. There was no separate and distinct portion of land ever known as Palestine, governed by Palestinians. Palestinians were and still are Arabs, indistinguishable from Arabs throughout the Middle East, sharing basically the same culture, language, and religion. Now, this is just history, right? This isn't prejudice, this is history. So for Palestinians to claim that what we call Israel today is theirs, there is no historical basis for that. They don't have a Palestinian culture. It was all called Palestine by the Romans. So from around 1500 BC, when God gave the Jews the land, it was never called Palestine then. It was always called Israel. And as I said, it was the Roman emperor in 134 AD who, by the way, massacred Jews, exiled Jews, and tried to obliterate Israel by calling it Palestine, tried to annihilate the Jews. It didn't work then. And as we've seen from God's promise in Scripture, it will never work. So yeah, there's a bit of a history on the Palestinians. I'm not saying they're bad people. They are candidates for the kingdom of God as much as anybody is. But the historical truth is the Palestinian people have no claim any land that was previously theirs.
So I guess the big question is, John, what will be the resolution to this conflict?
Yep. Well, here's the good news, because you can look at this conflict and it's been going on for a long time, not this specific one, but this conflict between Arabs and Jews. It's been going on for centuries.
Mhm.
When will it end? Well, God's told us when it's going to end. And there's this wonderful prophecy in Isaiah chapter 19. It's end time, talking about the kingdom of God, the peaceful time on earth. Isaiah 19 from verse 23. In that day, there shall be a highway out of Egypt. Bear in mind, Egypt have also been very anti-Israel in the past. Quite good at the moment, but that's going to change. To Assyria. Now, Assyria in Bible times covered the area we call today Iraq and Iran. Very anti-Semitic. Luke mentioned at the start of this presentation, Iran basically is responsible for backing Hamas with their munitions, etc. So there's going to be a highway out of Egypt going up to Iran and Iraq. The Assyrian shall come to Egypt. The Egyptian shall go to Assyria, and the Egyptians shall serve with the Assyrians. Okay, serve who? Well, verse 24 says, in that day, Israel shall be the third with Egypt and with Assyria, even a blessing in the midst of the land. These three are going to be all as if they are one in this day, whom the Lord of hosts shall bless, saying, blessed be Egypt, my people, and Assyria, the work of my hands, and Israel, mine inheritance. So you can see these are almost synonymous terms. My people, the work of my hands, my inheritance. They're essentially synonymous terms of Egypt, Iran, Iraq, Assyria, and Israel, who, of course, has often had the title God's people. Isn't that amazing? There's going to be a highway joining all three of them, and they're all going to be God's people, and they're all going to be getting along. So that's going to be how it's going to end. And of course, that only comes when Messiah, Jesus Christ, comes to establish his kingdom. But I have bad news before that. There are two different major invasion blocks yet to invade Israel. We read about that in Revelation 12 and chapter 13. Revelation 12 and 13. Revelation 12 is the dragon. Now, in traditional circles, they get all hung up on this being fallen angel devil attacking. Nothing to do with that. The woman with standing on the moon, surrounded with the sun as her clothing, and 12 stars on her head. It's a reference back to Genesis 37, the dream that Joseph had. It's Israel. Sun, moon, 12 stars. It's Israel. Go and have a look at Genesis 37. This dragon refers to Egypt. And in Scripture, Ezekiel 29, for example, is where Egypt is called a dragon. So Egypt, along with a whole lot of confederate nations, which we read about in Ezekiel 38 as well, will invade Israel, Revelation 12, and it says a third of the stars are cast down. So those 12 stars represent the 12 tribes of Israel. A third of them, a third of Israel will be annihilated by this Egyptian confederate invasion. It's not good for the future. Michael, the archangel, we read in Revelation 12, steps in though and rescues Israel for a time. But then we read in chapter 13 that the dragon, who's effectively been neutralized, gives its power to another power block called the beast. And the beast in Revelation 13 is what most people would know as the 666 man, the mark of the beast, the one who has a world empire, makes everyone get the mark, his mark on their wrist or their forehead, and you can't buy or sell without his mark. Amazing. We live in a day and age with technology that the economy can do that.
Yeah.
Our bank accounts, our work life, our savings, the way we spend our money, it's all electronic these days. it's almost to the point where cash is slowly going to go. So there's going to be this time when this beast power, who gets his power given to him from this defeated dragon power, Egypt, he then really goes to war with Israel. And he's the one who actually speaks great things and blasphemies. Power was given to him by God. There's only one power that can give power and take power. It's God. God gives to him power 42 months. In Daniel, it's called, it's given in days, but it's 42 months here. It's a 3.5 year period, basically, that he has power. He opens his mouth in blasphemy against God. That's Revelation 13, verse 6. He makes war with the saints and he overcomes them. Power was given to him over all tongues and nations. So this is going to be not only an invasion of Israel, but a worldwide power block. Now, one of the other things that he does, and we read this in Daniel 11, Daniel 12, and Jesus refers to it in Matthew 24, verse 15, as a part of the end time signs. It says, when you see the abomination of desolation, that's the title given to him there, which was spoken by Daniel the prophet, and he's referring to Daniel 11, Daniel 12, standing in the holy place. Mm-hmm. Now, what is the holy place? In the Jewish temple, there was the holy place, the most holy place, where only the priest was allowed to go, and he would only go there once a year, and God's presence dwelt there. Now, this beast invasion is going to desecrate the temple, stand in the most holy place in Israel's temple. Now, does Israel have a temple now? No, they don't. On that temple site where they've had 3 temples prior is a mosque, an Arab mosque. So that's got to go because the temple's always been on that Mount Moriah. Solomon's temple was there. Herod's temple was there. That's where they rebuilt Solomon's temple. So in some shape or form, that mosque is going to have to go. The Jews are going to have a temple, and the beast is going to invade that after that. Now, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 2 also talks about this. He says, don't be too quickly shaken in your mind or disturbed, because some people were saying during this time that Christ has come back. He's come. And some Christians were thinking, what, did I miss out? And Paul says, no, don't be worried, because he says, let no one deceive you. The day of the Lord will not come until first comes the falling away, and the man of sin is revealed, the one opposing and exalting himself over everything called God. He's going to be very atheistic or object of worship, and he sits in the temple of God, setting forth himself as God. So here's another reference, you see. He can't do this until there's a temple. And remember, Jesus is talking about this in Matthew 24. There was Herod's temple there. That got destroyed. The Jews got scattered. They had to come back to their land. They've got to rebuild a temple for this prophecy to take place. Isn't that amazing? God has given us these prophecies of the future. Now, the promises given to Abraham were that he and his seed would inherit the land forever. Some people think when Israel went into the land under Joshua, that was a fulfillment of this prophecy. It can't be. It was given to Abraham forever. Did Abraham live forever? No. Hebrews 11:13 says he died, not having received the promise. But the interesting thing is that the seed, Paul makes the point here in Galatians 3, verse 16. He says, when God said to him, to Abraham and his seed, he wasn't meaning seeds, plural. He was meaning seed, singular. And that seed is Christ. And he says, any of you who have been baptized into Christ can become part of that seed. So in other words, if you're a Christian and you're baptized into Christ, who's the promised seed, the promised Messiah, the descendant of Abraham, you are going to inherit the land forever. Now, how is that possible? You can only do that when you live forever. And that's why it involves Jesus coming to raise the dead, to change our mortal bodies into immortal bodies. You see, Galatians 3:28, Paul writing says, there's neither Jew nor Greek, bond or free, male or female, you're all one in Christ Jesus. Now, although obviously now we have those different roles, some are female, some are male, what he's saying is, as far as the kingdom is concerned, there'll be no male or female. There'll be no Jew or Greek. Doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, you will all be able to be a part of this. So, amazing prophecies that are going to come to pass. This land is always going to be Abraham's and his seed, but it's not just a Jew through natural descent that's going to inherit it. It's going to be a Jew through spiritual descent, through the Messiah Jew, the Lord Jesus Christ.
So, John, as Bible believing Christians, what should be our stance on this conflict?
Very good question. We've talked today about how God promised the land to the Jews. And in saying that, this is history. These are prophecies which have come to pass, which will come to pass. We've talked about future prophecies, future invasions of Israel, but how the land ultimately will be the kingdom of God, ruled by Christ and those of us who believe. And it's exciting, isn't it? It's exciting to know the future. Wow, it's incredible. What a hope to have. But what I want to say to all Christians, listen, don't lose sight of the emotion we must feel in these crises. Jews have been massacred, beheaded, all right, because of hatred. Bombs that have been fired into Palestine have killed women and children. Oh, on both sides, it's not good. And Jesus expresses this in Matthew 23 when he says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you've killed the prophets, you've stoned them. How often would I have gathered you as children together, as a mother hen gathers her chicks, but you would not. These are all tragedies. But Psalm 122 verse 6 says, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. For those who love you shall prosper. So as Christians, we should be praying for the peace of Jerusalem. Now, we know ultimately that peace is never going to come until the Prince of Peace finally rules there, sitting on the throne of his father David. That was the promise given to his mother Mary. Now, Matthew 5, Jesus says there, we've got to pray for our enemies. So as Christians, although we know the land is chosen by God, we must never lose sight of the fact that Jesus tells us to pray for our enemies. We're not to take up arms. There was only once that Jesus condoned the disciples to take up arms, to carry swords, and it was actually a setup to teach them not to carry swords, ironically. It was when he was about to be betrayed in the Garden of Gethsemane. He says, got any swords, boys? He said, yeah, we've got a few. That's enough, he says. So then they find themselves in the Garden of Gethsemane. Peter draws his sword, gets all passionate about defending the Lord. It's off the servant of the high priest's ear, which Jesus quickly heals again. And then he says to them, listen, he who takes up the sword shall die by the sword. In other words, don't do this. I've set this up to teach you a lesson. As Christians, you're not to get involved physically with this. 2 Corinthians 10 says, though we walk in the flesh, we do not war after the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but we are casting down imaginations, every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. This is our warfare. Fight against our own human nature to try and bring information that brings the thoughts of people into the right way. We are never and should never get involved with the carnal warfare of man. Now, in Proverbs 16, verse 7, it says, for man's ways please the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him. And we saw this in Solomon's day, King Solomon, until he got drawn away by his wives' false gods later on. To start with, he was a righteous man. He was dedicated to God. So God blessed his kingdom to the point where it says there was no Satan. That's the Hebrew word. It's translated adversary. That's just what Satan means, adversary. There was no adversary in Solomon's days. It was an amazing, prosperous kingdom. The Queen of Sheba came up, you remember, to see this amazing kingdom, and she went away. It said she had no breath left in her. That's what a righteous, blessed by God nation looks like. And I'm sorry, Israel, but although you are in your land because God is decreeing to the world, I'm God, you are not in a place where you are blessed by God. God would not allow the massacres that have happened if you were. So, as Christians, it's very easy sometimes you hear evangelical Christians getting all passionate about Israel, they're pro-Israel, and those Palestinians are evil, and Israel. And yes, we know the history, and the Jews are God's people in that sense. Listen, most of the Jews are atheists. Most of the Jews are atheists. And I just want to say, we are the prophets. We are the prophets of our day today. And the word of God, through the prophets, says this to Israel. And I want to say this to Israel today. Isaiah chapter 1, verse 3. The ox knows its owner, the donkey its master's feeding trough. But you, Israel, you don't know me. And my people, you don't understand. You're a sinful nation. You're a people burdened down by iniquity. You are offspring of those who keep practicing what is evil. Your children who corrupt whatever they do. Have abandoned the Lord. They've despised the Holy One of Israel. In their estrangement, they have walked away from me. Why will you still be struck down, Israel? And in Joel, thus saith the Lord through the prophet Joel to Israel, Joel 2:13. Israel, rend your heart, not your garments. Turn unto the Lord your God. For he is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, of great kindness, and he repents him of the evil. Who knows? He will return and repent, verse 14, and leave a blessing behind him. Israel, you need to listen to the prophet Joel, to the prophet Isaiah, and get back to your God, Yahweh, the God of Israel, so that your land will truly be blessed. Because Israel, if you don't, there are worse things coming upon you that the scriptures has prophesied. But God can repent of those things. So I would say that to the Jews and to the Palestinians. I would say there's another option for you in this conflict. Surrender. Surrender. Surrender to the God who loves you as much as he loves anybody in the world. Put away your pride and acknowledge your maker and his salvation to all nations. If you want the land of Israel, you can have it forever, but you can only have it by being part of the seed, the promised seed in the Messiah, the Lord Jesus Christ, repenting and getting baptized into him. Now, I appreciate we're bringing this message from a little, well, I was going to say country town. We're actually out in the country, in a little old country of New Zealand that no one's probably even heard of in the Middle East. But if God wills it, this prophecy will get to you. And hopefully you will take heed, because God is the power of the universe. He's the one who can solve all these problems for you, whatever side you are on today. Amen.
Amen.